So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Nelson Santini. I'm a Trident Proposals Me, and today we're actually having the next episode in the Polaris Webinar series. Today we're talking about the pause. It's over. The protest has been resolved, and we're moving on forward. So we wanted to take a quick moment to make sure that we would actually we're doing that, taking the right actions for Polaris and getting ready for the submission, which is actually just coming up. Moving fairly quickly through the presentation. If you have any questions as we move along, please let me know in the chat box. I'll be taking a quick look through it so I know that I can see it, and hopefully you can hear me well. But key takeaways for today, very few, it's only 4 of them. Number one is actually the MPJV protest is resolved. We're going to talk about that. And the 3 recommendations that we have, for this pause period. So the first one is fairly straightforward, doing a bid, no bid, just to make sure that we understand that still is actually a good idea to pursue Polaris. And also, what's going to be the impact on other solicitations that we have out there. So doing a bid, no bid from that perspective would be beneficial. And the last 2 kind of go hand in hand is reviewing your qualification project matrix and also reviewing your compliance matrix. So those are the key takeaways from today's presentation. We're going to move fairly quickly through it. So let's get started. Before we get started, actually, our sponsors today, Trident Proposal Management, we are a full proposal management service house, anything from market management to capture management, proposal management, and training and coaching. And today's presentation is kind of a mix between capture and the training and coaching. So these are the kind of services that we provide. You can learn more at tridentproposals.com. Today, I'll be your speaker, Nelson Santini, about 20 years of experience in capturing proposal management in the federal government sector, about $2 billion in business captured, former Navy sailor, submarines, and I'm actually a sales operations blogger. So if you want to communicate with me, if you have any questions after the presentation, please don't hesitate to hit me up at nelson@tridentproposals.com. And a quick review of the agenda. We're going to go through the timeline just to review what is the current timeline for Polaris, the quickest in the current changes, that we've actually seen in Polaris, the status of the protest, and then move on to the presentation, to the meat of the presentation, with just the quick recommendations. And those are actually just 2 sets of them. One is having a bid, no bid, and the next one is actually doing the qualification and compliance matrix checks. We'll have a quick Q&A session after that, and then we'll adjourn. So as far as the timeline and as far as the deadlines for Polaris, those remain basically remain as they were. I did a complete check of Polaris today on all throughout the boards, all throughout the news, and the deadlines remain the same. Questions were due on the 18th of April. The deadline for submission is actually the 13th of May. So actually a week from Friday, that's when the solicitation is supposed to be actually submitted. That said, I would not suspect that when the next day or so, the government announces that there is a delay. We know that we were on hold for approximately 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks. And within the comments that came back from GAO, we were going to see a delay on the submission deadline. So basically just giving more time to the companies that were basically presenting their bids to the government. We were supposed to see a delay or time granted back to them for them to prepare. So although the deadline still holds on the 13th of May as of like a couple of minutes before the presentation, I do expect that we may see actually a delay and at least a week, in time for everybody to prepare. We still actually just holding constant on the release for the hub zone and the veteran-owned small businesses that, still scheduled for Q4 of fiscal year 2022. So current timeline is still holding. We do expect a slight, actually, a grace period of about a week. So stand by for that one. As soon as we see something, we'll share that with you. As far as the changes, we're going to do a quick review of the changes that we observed on the last, that we commented on the last presentation, and that happened here in the month of April. So the first one is that there's no restriction on the number of relevant experiences and projects provided by a mentor JV relationship. And those are going to be changes that are going to hold true because the protest was dismissed. So again, no restrictions on the number of relevant experience projects provided. So, make sure that you actually are looking for the best projects so that you can actually have the highest number of points on the revised points matrix. Next on the list of changes is actually just, the letters of commitment can actually specify now which projects are going to be used for which pool. So before, it was actually, the rule was that only one project could be used per partnership and or for submission. Now letters of commitment can be used to kind of differentiate in which particular pool those projects are going to be referenced. So that's still a valid change. Another change that was related to the joint ventures and teaming was the fact that the joint venture could use the highest level of clearance of that relationship. And again, because the protest was dismissed, this is something that is now changed and part of actually the regulations of the solicitation. So a JV may use, in fact, the highest clearance of the mentor-protege JV relationship. Still consistent with the changes being accepted and the protest being dismissed, cost reimbursement contracts will be can be proven by either the FPDS report or by contract award documentation. So again, this is one of those changes that were related to and part of the last changes that were linked to the mentor-protege JV changes. And so these are actually going to remain constant and true throughout the solicitation. The last one, I believe, is actually the other change was the organizational risk assessment language around partnerships was amended, and we don't expect that that would be further amended after the protest being dismissed. And in correction, the last one is actually the cybersecurity and the Scrum assessment were both removed from the solicitation. So again, those will be actually addressed after award, and we expect that those will happen at the task order level when solicitations are actually just being led, right? The last, in the group of changes was actually that the total point was actually just changed in the matrix to 95,000 points. So that was a change, that we were tracking from before. So those are the complete summary of all of the changes. You can see that, with the protest being dismissed, those changes will remain enacted throughout the presentation, throughout the solicitation, And we want to make sure that, we take this moment as we are just looking forward to the submission coming up on the 13th and perhaps a slight grace period to make sure that we actually can look at the points matrix. So I'm going to take a quick second look at the chat box to see if there are any comments. I see no comments or questions, so I'm just going to carry on. I can actually hear, and perhaps Rebecca, can you do an audio check? Because I think I may hear you.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, yes,
okay.
Totally can hear. Can't see you, but we can definitely hear you now.
That's okay.
No worries. Yeah. Did you want to add anything to the list of changes that I just went through, which are consistent to the last release in April?
Yeah, so the only thing that I would just add is some amplifying information is there is for sure going to be an extension granted because they still have not opened up registration for the submission portal. So Symphony is, as you may know, that's the portal the GSA is going to use to collect all of the Polaris bids, and registration for that is still pending. So what I suspect is happening is that because they went ahead and closed out the Q&A period on the 18th, I think what we're going to see when they release the next amendment is a lot of the Q&A answered to, and that might be some of the delay post, since the pre-award challenge has been dismissed. That might be why things are still kind of on hold and we haven't seen any updates. They might just be churning through those Q&A in the name of efficiency to put out kind of one big update that takes care of a lot of the concerns that industry had leading up to this point. So I think the next amendment is going to be hefty, and it's going to require a really careful read just in case they changed anything else or added clarifying guidance.
I appreciate that. No, I appreciate that insight, and I concur with you that, we're definitely going to see a delay. I'm surprised that today, Wednesday, we haven't seen anything posted on any of the boards. But again, if it's anything like last week, as soon as we were done with the webinar in the afternoon on Wednesday, a change came out. So maybe we actually get to see something. But I do concur with you that we will obviously have to see a delay or a grace period to address the changes and deal with the latest group of amendments. And that's a great segue to the key questions or the quick recommendations that we have for today, just making sure we look at those amendments of what's going to be the impact for this solicitation. So thanks a lot for sharing that. Any other thoughts, on the changes before we, move along? Okay, nothing heard. All right, so I'll presume that no. So moving then on the agenda, after the changes, basically the only other set of news that we have is the fact that the protest was resolved. And in the comments, the only thing that we can observe is that basically the industry was heard through the protest, and this is actually the protest that was filed by BD Squared. And the GIO came back and basically said, we've heard it. We're basically going to move on forward with the changes that we had recommended. So we can, as Rebecca just mentioned, we expect to see some amendments to the solicitation, and we expect to see a slight delay on the submission deadline. But beyond that one, basically the mentor protege JV is actually just as it was last presented in the solicitation. And we do expect that this will actually have ramifications or will have actually impact on other solicitations that we've been tracking, like OASIS, which is another solicitation that will use a similar scheme, if you will, for the agencies to submit or for the companies to submit to the agency and for the solicitation to be managed. So we expect that this is something that kind of sets the precedence for other solicitations to follow. Rebecca, anything you want to add to my comments there?
Yeah, so I think probably a lot of people were not super excited to see the challenge dismissed. But the counterpoint is that the mentor protege program and joint venture is an official SBA program that is legal and binding and just as legitimate. So both sides kind of had good points in terms of what the ramifications were going to be. And just like I said before, when we get that next amendment, I think it's going to require a really careful read. Because what they may not have done, what they might have done was found kind of a workaround where maybe they limit the number of selectees that they're going to take in a mentor protege category, or done some other kind of breakout, just because they have to acknowledge that this is a legitimate program, but also that there is an impact to the rest of industry if they don't have that sort of advantageous relationship. So it'll be really interesting to see how they handle this, because like you said, Nelson, everybody is watching and trying to learn lessons from this so that, contracting gets smarter and more advantageous to the government without being, disruptively limiting to industry. Because, we certainly don't want to see the government discouraging people from responding to these contracts overall. So you can't put out something that's too big of a headache for people to deal with. So I think GSA is sensitive to that, and just really, really excited to see what this next iteration looks like.
No, I agree with you. I'm on the same boat and somewhat torn, having been on both sides of the mentor protege fence at one time in my career. It's a good thing to see. It's a little bit of a pickle when you handle these solicitations, but as you said, it's part of the program, and we know that the government will do its best to make sure that they're fair in their process. So we can only just now basically follow the rules and regulations and make sure that we make the most of them. And so that's kind of like what prompted this particular webinar, for us to just briefly touch on some key suggestions to make sure that companies make the most as, now we have a resolution in this protest. So thanks a lot for sharing that perspective, Rebecca. Okay. So I see no questions on the board, so I'm going to move to the recommendations, and I'll come back to any questions that we may have as we button up. But looking at the recommendations, the first one that comes to mind is to run a bid, no bid. And as Rebecca mentions, we expect that an amendment is going to come out. So with a new amendment, it's important for us to do a bid, no bid, not because necessarily we'd all of a sudden would have an epiphany and say, we spent 2 years pursuing Polaris, so we're not going to bid. But just following the good discipline and capture management to make sure that we understand what is the impact of the amendment, what's going to be the impact for this solicitation and also for the other ones, because we're not doing this in a vacuum. We suspect that small businesses are actually just doing multiple of these solicitations in at the same time concurrently. And so whatever changes happen here may have impact on others. And so having the bid, no bid is just not an academic issue in saying, do we want to bid Polaris or not? It's to understand what's going to be the impact on other solicitations and other pursuits, right? So put this into the perspective of, what does this delay in Polaris and also what are these modifications in Polaris, what's the impact that they have on the other pursuits that we have going on? Not only other pursuits, but the second point is important too. You only have a set of SMEs in your company. So as the amendments are actually just being understood and basically come down to the deck of the capture management team, take a moment to evaluate and find out what's going to be the impact and how does that cascade to other solicitations and also to your production line. Some of the SMEs that are helping in the proposal are likely to be actually just engaged in production affairs. So make sure that you actually just work with your capture team to make sure that if there's a substantial delay, that the production line is not impacted, and also that you can actually just carry on, make the submission without impacting Polaris or other solicitations. And the last one, it's kind of like along the lines of what Rebecca said, the Mentor JV program, a Mentor Protege JV program is actually a program for small businesses to graduate and for them to basically help them grow. So make the most of it. The government have said, yes, we're going to have an MPJV, and these are the rules that are going to govern this solicitation. So this is actually one of those where now is basically the time to make sure that we're pursuing them aggressively, that we're actually just making the most out of our points. So let's make sure we take a look at the scorecard, make sure to look at the qualifying projects, and let's make sure that we get the most out of an MPJV if you have one, to make sure you actually score the highest number of points in this best-in-class / grading system that is actually going to be used for Polaris. Rebecca, questions and comments for you? Anything you want to add to what I've just mentioned here?
Yeah, so just getting really specific about other things that you could be taking a look at. You'll recall the very first time we got a peek at the Polaris scorecard was actually back in September. That was 8 months ago. And because this is such a past performance relevant experience centric scorecard, it is entirely possible that some of the projects that you were planning on using are now ineligible, or hopefully in some cases, there are new projects that are eligible because they now meet the runtime duration requirements. So if the last time you calculated your score was based on 8 months old data, then I would highly, highly encourage you to take another look at your experience portfolio and make sure that the projects that you think you're going to submit are still your highest scoring projects. And Nelson, just like you said, we know that just because they put Polaris on pause doesn't mean that every other solicitation went on pause, right? Life didn't stop, out of respect for this thing. So if you're looking at multiple bids, just make sure you know where your resources are going. And if you need help, I think Nelson's probably going to jump into this next, so I'm going to steal a little bit of his thunder. But if you need help because now you've got multiple competing priorities with overlapping deadlines, this is a great use case to get in some surge support and just have another set of eyes double checking you and making sure that you are up to date with the latest requirements, that you haven't dropped anything between the cracks or not considered something that's going to be a game changer for that bottom line points total. So back to you, Nelson.
No thunder stolen. I mean, I'm glad that you actually mentioned that, because that was where we were going to go with the conversation, which is it's been a long delay, and it's likely that the regulations as far as what qualifies as a QP, will change. So absolutely is very important, that we actually just take a quick look at what's going to be going into the points matrix. Right? So what projects qualify, which projects would be the best ones to select, and that may change a little bit based on the new amendments. So let's not take that for granted. Again, just doing a bid, no bid, and then just reviewing the compliance and the qualification matrices against the new regulations is very, very important. So take the time to make sure that you look at if anything has changed. Don't take anything for granted, because the last thing that anybody wants is to basically have a 2+ year solicitation and capture basically be lost on an administrative error like submitting a qualifying project that is now outside of the window. So absolutely, good thunder for Rebecca to steal and just to tap on to say, yes, absolutely. Take a look at your QPs, make sure that they still apply, make sure that your mentor protege JV situation is actually just all squared away so that you can use those, if you fall under that category, to use and complete your portfolio of qualifying projects. So that was actually the last recommendation, which was look at the amendments coming out, take a moment to do a qualified bid, no bid, and then again, review your compliance and qualification matrix. And if we may be so bold, sometimes it is best to actually have a third party do those checks for you. And it's because you spend so much time looking at the solicitation, they may be right in front of you and you may be glossing through, recalling things from the past. Maybe this is actually just one of those good moments to basically have members of your capture team do a third party check and make sure that everything that you've selected is actually within the window and that actually just meets the requirements to actually just be evidence for the solicitation, right? So no worries there, Rebecca. I really appreciate you actually just bringing that up, because that was the next point. And so those were the major points of the presentation today. Just do a quick review of the changes. Now I guess firmed up now that the protest has been dismissed. And then just to look at the things that we should be doing right now. And we strongly recommend, again, that bid, no bid, and then that complete check on the qualifying project. So those were the major salient points for the presentation today. So with that, I'm going to open up the questions. We only have a few attendees today. Actually, so Rebecca, myself, Kim, you've been for most of the presentation here with us. Any particular questions from you, you can just feel free to chat, on us, okay? From Kim, the question, when self-scoring, where do you anticipate the point cutoff being for these two pools that are awarded? Rebecca, you're grinning, so I turn it over to you. What do you think?
Man, that is the $1 million question, right? It's probably one of the biggest reasons you tuned in here. I am not going to throw out a number because there are so many, I will say, detailed, nuanced requirements as part of the scorecard. So do I expect that there will be some perfect scoring bidders? Absolutely. And I think that there might be a healthy amount if the language in the solicitation doesn't curb the number of qualifying projects or teams that are in that mentor-protege relationship. On the other hand, we have, I'll tell you anecdotally, we have run scorecards for different companies who had originally self-scored and found huge point deltas because either the math wasn't right or they didn't understand how the NICS code alignment worked in the points gathering. Or they thought that they had a certification that they weren't able to substantiate. And so I think we're going to see a lot of companies thrown out because they just, for lack of a better way of explaining it, don't follow the directions, right? They don't have the kind of evidence that they think they have. And I don't know where the spread is going to be between, the perfect scores and the next group of people who have pretty good scores. I think that if you are not scoring at least 85,000, you need to take a really hard look at what you can do to boost your score. The other little piece of motherhood and apple pie that I'll give you is that be sure that you are tracking what happened in volume 4, because we had a lot of companies who ended up with a lower score because they decided to change the approved cost accounting system. Is now worth only 3,000 points instead of 4,000 points. So what ended up happening was that they were counting on volume 4 criteria to kind of boost their overall score, and now all of a sudden it was proportionately less. And so even though things scaled down somewhat consistently across the other volumes, they did end up with a percentage point lower in the breakout than what they were previous to that change. So it's a really tricky question. I wish I could tell you, with certainty that you need to have at least this much of a score to bid, but it's really difficult to account for people who don't follow the directions and will get disqualified on a technicality. And that is absolutely something that I expect to happen in this competition.
Well said. I appreciate that sharing. And not to get into the keywords and tricky phrases, but one of the things that we were tracking also in the solicitation for Oasis was language around quality spread and the best in class. And so It would be interesting to see if there are any keywords or phrases that are introduced in the amendment just to address the kind of like the point that Rebecca was making here, which also goes with, the benefit to the government and and basically, where to make the draw line on the minimum set of points, or how to basically just do a deeper selection to make sure we have the right spread in the pool. So a lot for us to look at, and thank you for that answer, Rebecca. Any other questions you have there, Kim? I see Kim is typing something. Okay. Oh, all good. Well, excellent. Well, those were the topics that we had for today, and I don't know that there are any other questions to address. But that said, if you have any other questions, please make sure you visit us at tridentproposals.com/blog tag of Polaris or /Polaris will get you all of the information related to Polaris in this particular solicitation. And that said, if there are no other questions, we do appreciate you taking the time to catch up with us today here on this particular webinar for Polaris. And so with that, we thank you so much for your participation. If you have any questions, again, Nelson at tridentproposals.com or Rebecca at tridentproposals.com. This is Nelson signing out. Rebecca, over to you. Anything else?
No, thanks so much.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.